Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class this morning. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're joining me live or whether you are watching the recording later on, I appreciate you being here with me today. Um, Whenever today is for you, right? So, as we're getting started today, just a couple of announcements. One is that this is a 2-week module. I will do my best to remember that this time. This is a 2-week module. There's a lot of stuff to talk about when we're talking about communities. So, the assignments from this module aren't due until next week. And then the week after that is going to be our midterm week. So there is, we'll talk more about that next time as well. But that is something to be mindful of as we are approaching the midterm here in a couple weeks. Also, I am currently in the process of working through all of your assignments that you turned in last week. I'll hopefully have stuff to you by the end of the day today. That's my goal regarding feedback for those and, helping you meet your needs there. Good morning, Ken. Good to see you this morning. So, as we are approaching the idea of community, what I thought I'd talk about today, and this morning's live stream might be just a little bit shorter than some of the ones previously, since we have been doing fairly long ones here lately and covering a lot of material. I want to save some stuff for next week as well when it comes to talking about community. So it might be a little bit shorter today, but I want to talk about just community in general. And what I want to talk about today is related to that document that I have in the module. Like the first thing is a chapter from a book that talks about community in terms of, well, in different terms, right? Like it talks about community in terms of like software and digital community, and it kind of relates that to physical community. So what I wanted to do today was I kind of wanted to just look at some of the main concepts from that chapter of that book and kind of just talk a little bit more about what I want you all to get out of that and relate it to social media a little bit with a good example. So we are kind of talking about the idea of community in general today. And, as we're approaching this idea of community, one of the important things that we're kind of looking at here is the idea that a community can be a lot of different things, right? When we are, all living in the same geographical region and share a similar culture, right? That creates a community, but a community can also exist online, right? Really, when we are, when we're talking about a community in general, we're really just kind of talking about a group of individuals that kind of work together that are in a similar place, right? In our case, our similar place is going to be our, just our social media platforms that we've talked about previously, right? So we're all kind of connecting in this virtual community in these similar places, which are our social media platforms, and we all share a similar sort of culture. Insofar as like the people who are on a social media platform, who are following specific people on a social media platform, have similar likes, have similar interests, just by the nature of, who they choose to interact with online. So when we're looking at fostering a community, having a good understanding of how all of this works and how we can take the idea of community and use it to our advantage to help to build and grow a community that's surrounded around our own social media interests, that becomes incredibly important. So I want to look at this idea of kind of understanding community and how community kind of works, and this again is in relation to uh, that chapter uh, material that you have in our module. So the first thing that we want to come to grips with here is this idea of just who our community is. Right? And I think the first bullet point here is incredibly important. Different people who are a part of a community have different personalities, have different plans, have different goals, have different ideas of what an environment they're a part of should be. Right? And so building a community in this sort of way, with this understanding, right off the bat, makes it incredibly difficult. Yeah, when we're thinking about things in terms of social media, everyone who's following us on social media, or everyone who's following the company that we're working for on social media, or everybody who we're kind of interacting with on social media who follows some of the things that we follow. All of these people have different personalities. They're different, right? They're individuals. And so to a certain extent, right, when we're talking about kind of taking these individuals and organizing them into a community, I mean, we're really kind of talking about, like herding cats, as the old idiom says, right? Like, we have all these different individuals with all their different points of view and all their different talents and traits. And we want to try to move them down that funnel that we were talking about last week, right? We want to try to get them from that awareness level to that loyalty level to where, they're supporting us, they're supporting the company that we're creating a social media brand for, or, whatever we're working with there. We want that loyalty support. And in driving that loyalty support, we want to build a community. And when we're building a community, we're kind of left with this question of, how do we inspire a group of people to organize? And maybe inspire is a bad word here. Maybe it's the right word. I'm not entirely sure, right? As we are approaching the idea of the organization of a group of individuals in a community, which is really what we're doing, right? When we're, inviting people to come into a new place, we're trying to build a community from scratch. And so we're inviting all of these people in. So to some degree, right, the responsibility is going to fall on us as the inviter, as the person who is asking these people to come in, to help foster this community, right? So to some degree, I think the term inspiration here is a good one. But to another degree, I'm not sure, how inspirational we could be within group dynamics. When we're considering all of these different individuals, when we're considering all the traits and all the personalities, a better way to say this might be that we are going to facilitate an environment in which organization of this people group, in which creation of this community is possible. And really, we get into a lot of sociological and psychological topics here as we're discussing the creation of virtual communities. The creation of virtual communities are going to be very similar to the creation of physical communities. We're all going to kind of share these different values in the community. Now, in our digital community, in our social media community, we're going to have an advantage that we might not have if we were building a physical community. And that's the idea that there is a point on which everyone can relate. Right? And that is going to be the kind of overarching theme of what you're doing, right? Like if you're, if you're playing a specific video game, like, you're playing Minecraft or whatever, like, and you're doing things surrounding that, like, you're going to know that the people who are going to gravitate toward you and gravitate toward your community are going to be in that sphere, and they're going to be people who like Minecraft, and they're going to have a relational point there. Anybody who, if you're doing things on business or education or whatever, like, we have this point that people are seeking out because they're interested in it, that is going to be this relational point. So, it's not like we're just bringing in an entirely random group of people and trying to give them the means to become a community. We do have this singular relational point that we can utilize to help foster these relationships. But I think at the end of the day, right, one of the big things here is that all of the people in our community are very, very different. And this is one of the graphics that's in that chapter, and it's trying to show you kind of the heterogeneous nature of the general group, right, of the general community. We see all these people coming together for a singular purpose, but we have the red dots and the blue dots and the yellow dots, and these are all people who have different talents, are interested in maybe different sub-aspects to what you're doing, have different traits, different personalities that would cause them to go one direction versus another direction. And so we see all these different groups here. And it's really difficult for us to kind of group them together, because what we're really doing here is we're taking a pile of individuals, right? When we're introducing a new group, when we're trying to build a new community, we have a pile of individuals. And so each of these individuals are just kind of free floating out there, right? They're on their own little island because they have their own perspective, their own skills, their own ideas, their own likes, their own dislikes that they're bringing to a community. And so the question becomes then, well, where do we go from here? Right? When we're small, like we all are, in terms of creating a brand new community from scratch, when we're small, the idea of fostering and creating a community is kind of easier, right? Because when we have fewer people to manage, and we have fewer people to kind of try to engage and get into the community, we can actually engage them. Right? And, we'll bring up some examples here. Like one of the examples that I hear a lot, and of course, you might have heard it from some of the people that, you might watch on YouTube or what have you, or, people that you might follow on other social media platforms. Like you'll see people on Facebook, they'll make a post, and then they'll engage people down in the comments and they'll talk to them. If they have concerns, they'll address them. Right? We see this direct engagement. You hear YouTubers oftentimes talking about how, when they were a small channel before they hit, 1 million followers, they could go down in the comment section, read the comments, and interact with people. Answer questions, take feedback, and so on and so forth, right? So, like, as we're small, the idea of kind of being a go-between for these different groups and trying to help bridge gaps and address likes and dislikes and take in ideas to try to take this grander sense of community and foster it can really be more direct, right? We can have more direct engagement. But as we grow, obviously this gets way bigger, right? Like, especially on an individual level, like, we are, if we somehow manage to get, even a remotely large follower size, like even 1,000, that are regularly interacting and engaging, right? If we can get 1,000 people down that brand funnel, down that marketing funnel that we were talking about last week, that immediately becomes incredibly difficult for a single person to manage directly, for a single person to manage individually. So what happens there, right? Like we see this general group, we see all these people, the needs aren't getting met, right? Because we have all these different ideas, all these personalities, all these different traits. And so we see all these different people start to kind of trail off, right? So we'll lose a few, right? Because when we aren't able to engage these people, when their needs aren't being met, and we can't figure out how to get them involved in the grander community to move them down that funnel, what we end up with is we lose people. Because all these people are still individuals at that point and not a part of something bigger, not a part of the grander community. And we can do small things to help us out with that. Right? One of the things we talked about last time was this idea of, trying to foster an environment in which, your users can feel like they're a part of something bigger. We talked about that in terms of bringing people down the funnel. We mentioned things like coming up with a name for your follower group, right? So when you're addressing your follower group, you're not addressing them as everyone or whatever. You're addressing them as something specific. So, on that relational point, right, you're kind of able to bring everyone together on that relational point, which is a like for this thing. But at the same time, right, that's not going to be effective long term, because if you're not doing any other community building efforts, eventually your clever name for your following group is going to be just like anything else, right? And it's going to just, it's going to lose all the meaning, because it's just a clever name more so than it is, an actual attempt to build community, because we're losing these individuals. So when we get large and we're no longer able to directly connect, and we're no longer able to make those connections to try to make people feel like part of a community, I mean, where do we go from here, right? So the internet, and by extension social media, gives us this unique opportunity. Because one of the interesting things that we can work with here regarding social media is that, well, our users not only have the ability to interact with us, they also have the ability to interact with one another. And so this is why, oftentimes you'll see people having moderation teams, community management teams, right? Trying to expand that sphere of influence outside of the one content creator to having other people. And if you're able to engage with a community well enough while it's small, right, you can make these connections and have these kind of community leaders come out, so that when you grow larger, these good connections that you made when you were smaller give rise to a moderation team, give rise to a community management team that are people who are a part of the community. And so you're not having to interact with everybody. You have this group of people that you interacted with initially that are able to kind of take the reins and welcome new people and be friendly to new people and answer questions and hear concerns and maybe relay them back to you. And this can be formal, right? You can go to these people and you can ask them to do this for you, or it could also be informal, right? Like a lot of times we see this kind of growing out organically, because when you've created those connections and you've created that loyalty, right? You've driven them down that brand funnel. It is the whole idea of loyalty, right? Like, this is the thing that I like, this is the thing that I'm engaged in, and so I want other people to like it too. So when we see new people come in and they have questions or they have ideas or they have issues, I'm going to want to organically engage with them, even though I'm not the content creator. I'm just someone who is sort of personally invested in this. Right? And that can create issues on its own, right? Like, there could be some boundary problems that could happen there. Definitely. Especially when we're looking at stuff like Facebook, when you see a lot of the like influencer culture on Facebook, the people who aren't making specific types of content, but it's more like the vlogs and the personality type of content. At the end of the day, what those people are selling and the community that they're trying to create is themselves, right? Like, it's this idea that their personality is valuable. And so people who are a part of that community kind of see themselves as a friend, right? Even though you've never really met that person, we kind of get these sort of blurred lines, right? And that's something that, kind of needs to be addressed and needs to be dealt with on occasion, right? Because these are strangers. These are just people that feel like they know you because they've engaged in a community that's built around your personality. So I know none of us are like working on any sort of personality based content creation ideas, but I know you all, or at least most of you all, have probably seen them, right? And it's one of those things that is prevalent nowadays. So it is something to be aware of as you're approaching that, because that's another thing about building a community, is that you want to build that engagement, but you also want to make sure that you have boundaries set. You want to make sure that people are understanding where the lines are. Maybe if you see someone engaging with someone else in such a way where it's like, whoa, that's maybe crossing a line, just reaching out to them, and explaining why that is over the line in a kind way, and help establish boundaries can be very helpful there. But this gives us this whole idea, though, that we can have this formal or informal, organic or inorganic moderation team kind of rise up, and we can have other people that are a part of the community interacting with new people that are coming into the community. And what we end up with there is a lot of the onus of this community building being taken off of you, right? Like, you're still at the center of it, whether you're managing it for yourself or you're managing it for a company that you're doing social media management for, right? You're taking a lot of that off of you, and you're putting it on to community members themselves, right? Community members can interact with one another. And this is actually something that I've seen on Twitter a lot, right? And you'll see it on Facebook a lot, and you'll see it on, YouTube a lot. If you're looking in the comments section and you're looking in, underneath posts and all that kind of stuff, right? You can see someone ask a question, right? Someone making a general inquiry about something going on. And then you have someone else, not the content creator, not anyone that's directly related to the content creator or in their employ, just a member of the community coming through and saying, oh yeah, they talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I remember they said this. That's the answer to that question. Right? So we see, as we move people down that brand funnel that we talked about last time, getting them to a loyalty level to where they're loyal to the brand or they're loyal to you as an individual, right? We start to see this community engagement happen between individuals. And when this happens, we can actually allow this community to kind of divide themselves up into subgroups, right? Like this is going to naturally happen. Right? It happened, this is a sociological thing, right? Like every community kind of divides itself up into subgroups that have different interests, that have different personalities, that have different takes. And then we start to see this community organize into a series of subgroups instead of having, just this heterogeneous, amorphous blob of a community. We now have a semi-organized community of different subgroups that have different sub-interests under the umbrella of your primary interest. And one of the interesting things here is that each of these subgroups is going to have a different investment into the community at large, right? Some of these are going to be that loyal community team, right? Like they're going to be the ones that are all the way down that funnel, and they're going to be the ones that are trying to get other people to come in and, kind of spreading the good word, if you will. You can't see my hands, but I'm doing air quotes, kind of, getting people involved in the community, sharing it with their friends and getting the word out there. And then some of them might be fan artists, right? Like one of the things that we see in communities a lot nowadays are fan artists. And so one of the things that they like to do with their fandoms is to create artwork based on the things that they like and the communities that they're involved in. We can kind of extend that nowadays into, cosplaying. Cosplaying is a very popular thing. And cosplaying within communities, cosplaying characters that are a part of, say, a TV show, right? That, you've kind of joined a social media community online. And then sharing content of yourself cosplaying these characters can be one of these subgroups, right? Because we have these different people and they're doing these cosplays, and these cosplays are kind of the sub-interest that's an interest for, this subgroup that is a part of this, umbrella overarching community that we're dealing with here. So there are a lot of different ways, like we can take subgroups and we can kind of organize them, and we can allow them to get more involved doing something that they like doing. Right? Like, memers would be another example. People that like to make memes about something they're interested in. Right? And I've got a good example that I'm going to show you here at the end that's going to kind of bridge us into kind of showing a good example of how we can actually, not directly, but indirectly, kind of allow these people to engage in their own personal interests, share them with the community at large, and sort of give them tasks to help build the community. There's been a trend with among YouTubers, large YouTubers over the last several years, that really does this exceptionally well, that takes and allows that heterogeneous group that we were looking at earlier to segment off, become these different subgroups, and get engaged in their own ways that benefit both the subgroup specifically, right, but also the group at large. We have these 3 segmented groups here, but they're still a part of this larger group. So, this is valuable, right? Like constructing these different teams, having these different subgroups, it's valuable, but it's not enough, right? Because, we still want to make sure that the community is being engaged overall, because otherwise we might see segmentation of our community. So in this case, what we end up with is not just the random stragglers breaking off into the different directions, we end up with whole subgroups breaking off and going another direction. So if we're not still engaging a subgroup toward that part of the wider community, toward that part of the common goal, we actually have more risk here in losing a larger part of our community, right? So we need to ensure that not only do we have these teams, not only are we having these subgroups that are having these sub-interests that are still related to the community at large, we need to try to fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I think the example that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes does an excellent job of that. All right, and this is where we're kind of rerouting communities and giving communities an opportunity to share among subgroups and to show off what's going on among these different subgroups. And it also gives us an opportunity as the content creators or as the social media managers or whatever to take our platform, whatever it may be, and use that to facilitate communication between our subgroups. So how does this apply to social media in general? The more involvement we can get from our community with specialized interest at the center of community involvement, the further we can move people down that funnel to being a loyal fan. Right? So we're connecting the big interests with the small interests. We're engaging people as a whole, right? And then the goal there is to take these individuals, make them a part of subgroups so they have a smaller community within the larger community that they can relate to. But then they also have that larger community that has that centralized relational point that they can relate to. So it's just structures within structures at that point. So at this instance, they're not just fans, they're not just followers, they're not just subscribers, and they're really not just a part of something bigger. Right? But if we're able to engage these subgroups who all have their own interests and their own personalities and their own likes and dislikes, not only are they a part of something bigger, but they have a role in creating something bigger. Right? And I think our example here that we're going to look at does this incredibly well. So a common thing that's happening, or that's happened in the last few years with modern YouTube creators, is creating a subreddit for their channel on Reddit, right? And this is typically a way that YouTubers with larger communities can find a way to foster engagement, can find a way to foster the engagement of these subgroups, can use the Reddit platform to have these subgroups engaging with the entire community, right? Because by the nature of sharing posts from community members onto Reddit, they're sharing it with the community at large that's utilizing the Reddit platform. So some of them might be a part of one subgroup, some of them might be a part of another subgroup. So just by nature of sharing and saying, hey guys, look what I made. You know, I like to animate, I like to draw, I like to create art. And I know we all like this thing, which is what this subreddit is about. So I made some art of this thing. And what do you guys think? Right? And so then you have people that, you know, are maybe interested in some other parts that don't really engage in the fan art side of things. They see it and they can comment, they can interact, they can have a good time with it, right? And they can also use some of the Reddit features of the upvote and downvote to, and like the donation of Reddit gold and flair and all that kind of stuff to actually give credence and give props, to people who they think made something cool and actually played a role, in developing something neat for this community, right? So they're contributing to the subreddit based on their niche interests, whether it's art, whether it's memes, whether it's comedy, whether it's animation, whether it's cosplaying, whatever that sub interest is. And then in turn, this is where it gets incredibly creative, right? Remember what we talked about on the last screen there, or 2 screens ago, being able to take our platform and use it to facilitate communication between the subgroups. Well, then the content creator can take and make a video about what's going on their Reddit, reacting to posts on their Reddit. So they're engaging the community, they're liking they're verbally liking the things that's on the Reddit, and they're featuring the things that's on the Reddit, so it's giving that credence. And at the same time, right, that's building up the people who are posting on the Reddit and inspiring them and encouraging them, and that's going to, push them down that funnel to that loyalty level. Right? But at the same time, it's also engaging people that might be higher in the funnel to say, hey, why don't you get more involved, right? We're having a lot of fun over here on the subreddit. Come over here to the subreddit and contribute based on your interests. Right? Which is a pretty interesting, pretty cool thing. And so I want to kind of show an example of that really quickly. One of the easier ones that I could guarantee would probably be family friendly is the Captain Sparkles subreddit. Captain Sparkles is a Minecraft YouTuber, generally known to be family friendly. Been around for a long time. Has a, 10 million subscriber YouTube channel and a series of other YouTube channels. And they've created this Reddit here where they can get involvement from their community. And we can see, like, if we go through here, we have animations, we have different posts about different interests. Memes and all this sort of fun stuff, right? Just getting the community involved, getting the community talking about one another, giving the community the option to, engage in things that are their sub interests. And then in turn, right, the content creator can create a video where they are looking at their subreddit, talking about what's on the subreddit, and engaging the community that way, right? So you have that organic community engagement in the subreddit. And then you have the content creator doing the acknowledgement and engaging the people to drive them toward that path and getting involvement that way, right? So we see this kind of being twofold. It's incredibly interesting, right? And this is just one example, right? And this is probably something that, we wouldn't necessarily want to do ourselves, since what we're talking about here are primarily large platforms, right? And when we're getting into this subgroup engagement, right, that's going to be large platforms that we really need to address that with, right? Like, as I mentioned earlier, as we're small, which we all would be as we're working on our projects and such, we can still kind of directly engage and influence things that way. But when we get larger, it is important to kind of have this plan for how we want to engage our community to keep growing. Because at the end of the day, right, like, when it comes to social media, especially if we're working for a company to do social media, or if we are, if you decide to make your career social media at some point, right? The metrics that are important are those engagement metrics. They are those subscribers and watchers and followers and, basically people at every step of that funnel that we talked about last week. And they're all significant. Right, so that's basically all that I have for you for today. So, remember that this is a 2-week module, so we'll talk about some different stuff next week. I thought this topic was good enough to kind of cover on its own. It gives you some ideas about what I wanted you to get out of that book chapter that I've included in the module. And it still leaves a lot to talk about for next week as well, right? So we'll talk even more about, understanding community and building community next week. That's all that I have for you for today, though. I'm going to hang out and chat for just a few minutes, just in case anybody who's here with me live has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have questions, please send me an email or a Teams message to let me know. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.